Welcome to Keep It Humane, the podcast, where we dive deep into topics surrounding kindness, compassion, and creating a more humane world, whether it's in our communities, in the workplace, or in the world of animal control and shelters. With our hosts,
Ashley Bishop.
And Ashley Bishop.
And I'm Daniel Ettinger. This show is sponsored by Tomahawk Live Trap. Check them out, livetrap.com. We're back. It is Bishop and Wisconsin Bishop today is making yogurt. I heard she had a yogurt machine, and she's, instead of doing like you know how they do lemonade stands or whatever, she's doing a yogurt stand on her corner this
That
week.
doesn't seem very health code conscious, just to be honest.
Could you imagine? How are things in Texas, Bishop?
Good. Again, I'm always complaining about the weather over here, but you know what? This week we had hail
What the hell?
and just crazy rain. It was nuts. And today, so earlier in the week, it was probably about 80 degrees. Today, it's like 60. I don't understand Texas sometimes.
I mean, there's a lot to be said with that statement there.
Wow. Okay, rude. How are you? How are things over there?
Well, I'm good, but for our listeners, they really need to check you out on YouTube because your hair is, as the kids would say, on fire today. It looks great.
Thanks.
Yeah, she just got a haircut, folks, and I'm telling you, check us out, YouTube, Instagram. Well, you can't watch live on Instagram, but if you
No.
could, you would.
Thanks, Dan.
I'm good. You know why I'm so good? Because Tomahawk Live Trap, they're celebrating their 100th year in business in this 2025. That's crazy. So in 1925, they started.
You're amazing.
Family owned and operated business who work with humane professionals around the world to produce the safest and most effective animal handling equipment available. You could save 10% on their products by using discount code Keep It Humane. You know why I say it like that? Because it's Keep It Humane in all caps. You can't just say Keep It Humane if it's not, you know what I mean? So Keep It Humane in all caps. You can go to their website at livetrap.com or call 800-272-8727.
If you're in Texas, they're going to be at Texas Unites this week.
This week. It'll be this week.
This
so
week.
I think
so go visit them.
It'll be when this airs, Texas Unites in Dallas.
Mm-hmm. In Allen, sir.
Oh, it's not even in Dallas?
No, it's in Allen, Texas, from what I remember.
How far is that from Dallas?
Not very far. It's all part of the mecca of all that stuff.
You know what?
Go meet Kyle and Ashley.
That's so she'll be having her yogurt there at the stand at the Tomahawk Live Trap stand. You can get free yogurt made specifically from Ashley, Wisconsin Bishop. That's what they do with all the cows up there.
Okay.
Did you know I was today years old? Actually, like 2 months ago, when I realized that Houston is the biggest city in Texas and not Dallas.
Duh.
I didn't know this. I had no idea. So, welcome to my my world of just not knowing. Every day is a learning experience.
I will say though, Dallas has I feel like they have the worst traffic, more so than Houston, to be honest, because they're, the legendary Highway 35 in Texas that goes through most of our major cities. It's just god awful in Dallas. I don't know how people function in Dallas.
So I bought a motorcycle because I live in Southern California, and I thought, all right, this will help with traffic. And, I'm still a rookie, but at some point it'll absolutely help with traffic. It already has made an impact. That's pretty cool. But I will say this, and anyone, if you want to argue this, please, you send us an email. I don't care who or where you are.
Uh-oh.
Chicago has the worst traffic in the entire United States, in my opinion. I've lived in New York. I've lived in LA. I lived in Denver. I've been in some major cities. Chicago is 100%. I will never, I don't even want to go back to Chicago because of their traffic and the cold and the wind. Anyway, check out our website, Keep It Humane, keepithumane.com. Check us out on all the socials. I have no other fun updates. It's been a chill week. I'm about to come to your state tonight. I'll be there for less than 24 hours, and then I'll be in Colorado.
My state?
Yeah, San Antonio.
San Antonio.
Yeah, I'll be there for a quick trip. Great opportunity to teach some of our military social workers. Love those opportunities. So
neat.
In and out, and then get to spend some time with the kiddos. So fun times.
Yeah. Nice. Well, you just missed Fiesta. They have like this huge celebration of all kinds of things in San Antonio. I haven't been yet. Um,
How far is the drive? Like 2 hours?
more like three, I think, from where
Okay.
I'm at, kind of sort of. It's not terribly far, but not as far as my hometown, that's for sure.
Well, I say we introduce our guest. I'm really excited about I think like this is one of the reasons why we rebranded the show was we didn't want to just stay in that world of just animal shelter, just animal control. And there's so much out there in the world of animal welfare. And I think we have to look at it big picture, right? We have to look at how it's all interconnected and what goes on in our shelters. It may be a reflection of what goes on in the world. And so if if you don't know, now you know. There's a great book out there called Forget the Camel, and it was authored, can I say that? Authored or written by Elizabeth MeLampy. And Elizabeth, welcome to the program and good morning, I guess, or whenever people are listening, good afternoon or evening.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thanks for putting up with our opening segment. We have a Harvard. I'm kind of intimidated because we have a Harvard grad on the program, and
Yes, I know.
here I am, some street kid from Pittsburgh, PA, all nervous because I'm like, uh-oh, Harvard. That's a pretty cool accolade. But before we get into that, just talk a little bit about you. Like, what's your history? What's your ethos? What's your why, Elizabeth?
Ooh, big question. Yeah. Well, first of all, my dad's from Pittsburgh, so
Mm,
we're all more alike than we think.
love this guy. Shout out, Dad.
Um, so I'm a lawyer and a writer. I'm really fascinated by animal issues. I have thought about them a lot and hard sort of my whole life. I grew up in a family that was really animal friendly. We always had pets around. We always, my sister and I learned how to horseback ride. I mean, we were always doing things around animals. My grandmother was a veterinarian. She, had a sort of her practice at her house when I was young and growing up. So I always was around animals and always cared about them sort of as individuals and as, creatures that had their own sets of needs and wants and their own sort of, the animals in my life were always owed respect. They weren't always like the animals that we interacted with were owed something. We had to respect them, and we certainly had to be nice to them, and sort of had to, as they grew old, and some of them grew crankier, sort of had to give them their space. They're their own world. And so that was kind of my background. And then when I went to law school, I started basically learning more kind of about the bigger picture animal stuff that goes on in our world. So learning about our food system, learning about, animals in research, learning about animals in entertainment, kind of these bigger buckets than, my pet next door or whatever. And once I started thinking about those bigger picture issues, it seemed to me that I had to kind of deal with the two different sides of me. One, that I really loved animals. I said that all the time and I felt it. And I liked seeing wildlife and I liked my pets and all of those things. And on the other hand, on this other side was that, I was doing a lot of things really unthinkingly that affected a lot of animals in my life. So things like buying the shampoo I'd bought since I was a kid was tested on animals. Things like eating chicken for lunch, obviously it includes killing an animal sort of by proxy, and all sorts of things like that. So I started to have to reconcile these two pieces of myself, which, is a hard process, but I think a really fruitful one, and kind of happened throughout my law school experience as I got more and more involved in the world of animal law, which is just this kind of really niche, but also very broad area of law that just deals with the law as applied to animals. So I learned as much as I could about every single aspect of animal law. So again, like food animals, entertainment, animals used in research, animals used in experiments, sort of like all the broad world. I tried to soak up as much as I could. And so that started me sort of on this journey that led me to write this book, as I continued to think about animals and continued to think about how our laws treat animals. I was really fascinated by the ways that we talk about animals because I think, laws are you know written down on paper and they say what has to be, they provide these rules, but ultimately a lot of those laws reflect kind of what we think and say and assume about animals, kind of broadly. And so that's a little bit kind of about my journey and how I started to think about animals, and why it matters to me so much that we include them in sort of our frame of reference as we think about the world.
So, when you were going through school at that time, how have things changed when you were how have the laws changed since you were in school to now?
Bro,
Uh,
she's like 26. It was like 2 years ago.
Hey,
no,
hey, that could still,
No,
I
I
mean,
know. No, I know.
Dan,
I know.
our
I
industry
know.
changes.
Like every
I
second.
am older than 26. I, yeah, the laws haven't really changed. The actual
Okay.
statutes haven't changed that much. I think the Trump administration has changed a lot of the regulations that's sort of like actively unfolding, things like line speeds, things like, like sort of regulations about labeling, about animal testing, and I'm not an expert in all of those things that are happening live, but I think it's certainly something that activists all over the country and advocates are really following and thinking about because it's, as with a lot of things, there's a statute on the books that Congress writes that is often really broad and sort of has, lofty goals. And then there's the regulations that actually implement that. And so those regulations are easier to change. And I think, different administrations can prioritize them as they wish and change things. So I think the regulations have changed somewhat, but largely the big statutory schemes, the big sort of big picture stuff has been the same, and not just since I was in law school, but for decades.
And not to get political, because we know the climate on this of this country. It's so, in my opinion, it's sad that like it has become so. What's the word I want to use? Visceral.
Political.
Poli just like it shouldn't be black and white, in my opinion. Like people should be able to have opinions of whatever, and people shouldn't just be judged on one opinion. Like let's look at the whole person, maybe like their everything. Anyway, but that administration, the first time he was in office, that's when the PACT Act was actually signed into law, like a federal law. So do we know, is that administration more uh, animal friendly? Do we know, like, is there anything to support it outside of the PACT Act or anything to counter it, et cetera? Do you know, just from your viewpoint?
I think from what I've heard, the animal welfare issues and animal issues in general often are very cross-cutting of political parties. So like, when you poll people on whether they think animals should be treated humanely before slaughter for food, for example,
Mm-hmm.
like I forget the exact number, but something like 60 or 70% of people agree that they should be. It's really high. It's like higher than any other issue. Like we cannot get 70% of America to agree on anything, and we can on certain welfare things. And
Okay.
I think with animals like dogs and cats, it's even stronger. I think people like, I mean, I think it's even higher than that. I think everyone sort of broadly thinks dogs and cats, pets should be treated with respect and with kindness and sort of with
Sure.
the bare basics of a life free from suffering. And I think when you have an issue that is that cross-cutting, it does kind of defy those party boundaries a little bit, where you might have the Trump administration do something friendly for, cats and dogs or something like that. But then again, the like kind of changing the line speed regulations for slaughter is going to really negatively affect a lot of animals that we slaughter for food. So it's
Okay.
not like even across. It's not like all Democrats are so great for animals and all Republicans aren't, or
I
vice
see.
versa. I think it's a matter of which animal you're talking about, which I think is something I write about a lot in my book. I think
Okay.
different animals we treat differently for all sorts of reasons, both sensical and nonsensical.
Sure.
And also, what exact behavior you're talking about. So pets are going to be treated really differently than food animals always, and people are going to have different perspectives about how that should be. So it's not a simple answer, I don't think.
We need to get Temple Grandin on the phone and have her help with some of these, um, like you said, the line speed. I mean, that was her whole thing with the cattle dairy industry, or beef industry, I should say. Um, and if you don't know, I mean, I'm sure you know who Temple Grandin is, but for our listeners, super interesting read. If you haven't ever read any of her books, check those out too. Talk to us like the motivation, forget the camel, like
Mhm.
what, where did that come from? Like what was the start of that?
So the start of it was before I was born. So my grandmother was an anthropologist. She was a veterinarian, but by the time I was born, she had gotten a PhD in anthropology and was writing sort of anthropological books about the relationships between humans and animals. And she wrote books largely about the American West, so like books about rodeo or things like that. And when I was born, she was working on what would have been kind of like an academic anthology of animal festivals around the world. She was looking at things like the running of the bulls in Spain, sort of these big picture animal festivals that take place all over the world. And she unfortunately passed away before she could finish her book. And so there was tons of boxes of like file folders and clippings and, newspaper cutouts and whatever in my parents' attic. And during COVID, I was reminded about one of these events that I knew my grandmother had attended. And I just sort of wanted to see what was left of her work. So I dug out these file boxes and started to pick through it and organize, kind of wrap my mind around what was left of this project. And as I kind of dipped my toe in and started Googling and started researching, I realized that there's actually like something here. Like this really matters, that people are doing these types of things to animals all across the country, and the world. I will say I chose in the book to focus only on the United States just because it's my own cultural context and it's sort of my own legal world. It's just the world that I felt most comfortable sort of speaking about. But they happen all over the world, of course. And yeah, so the project sort of picked up where my grandmother left off. And the book is about animal festivals. So it is about these events that center on a non-human animal for part of the ritual or the celebration or the sort of activity of the festival, and kind of build community and culture around that. And so it's a project that I think is very specific to our time because I traveled to all of these festivals. I saw them all with my own eyes and was able to sort of experience them both as a tourist and as a researcher. But it's also a really cross-cutting, kind of timeless project because I have my grandmother's notes from 30, 35 years ago, and I was able to, read them and say, oh, this is the same, this is different, and sort of make arguments and thoughts about why that might be the case. So it's a project that I think is really near and dear to my heart for that reason, but it's also, I think, an important one because it talks about how we kind of think about animals, again, not maybe in the law or in the rules or regulations, but like the average person, Joe Schmo from wherever, how do they think about animals? And I think these festivals are a piece of that.
So, what was kind of maybe one, not major difference, but a difference that you saw from when your grandmother was doing her research to now?
I think the biggest difference is how some of the festivals had shifted to talk so much more about welfare, which is, I hope appropriate for your listeners. I think
Absolutely.
welfare is just such in some ways, it's a catch-all. I think people, whenever there's a criticism or sort of a fear about how we treat animals, welfare is often the answer. It's something we jump to when we say, oh no, we treat them well, here's why, here's our long list of welfare things. I think on the other hand, for some of these festivals, the assertion of welfare serves to kind of like push down that opposition, say, no, 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 it's fine that we're doing this because we take care of our dogs or our frogs or whatever.
Mm.
And so the examples that I just used are the ones that come to mind that I'll share with you. So the first is one of the festivals I write about in the book is the Iditarod dog sled race, which takes place in Alaska.
Mhm.
It's about 1,000-mile dog sled race where a single team of dogs runs the course over about a week, a little longer than a week, depends on the year. And in the process of this running, it's really hard on the dogs. Obviously, they're running 1,000 miles in 8 or 9 days, and they often suffer injuries, and injuries to their bodies, to their legs, to their joints, to their tendons. Like they will have diarrhea, sort of systemic injuries, and then almost every year dogs die on the course. Not every year. The year I actually went, there were no dogs that died, but oftentimes, this last year I think 3 dogs died, and then or 2 years ago 3 dogs died, and then this year they found a dog died, and they found out that she was pregnant, and so things happen that are horrible on the trail. But I think that the focus on welfare is really paramount. When you read the sort of official rules of the Iditarod, there's a lot about welfare in there, about how there's welfare checks added into the race course. These veterinarians that assess the dogs before, during, and after the race. I mean, there's a lot of care about these animals, but it doesn't actually change the core race, right? Like the core problem is still there, even if we kind of build these welfare barriers around it to try to prolong this activity. And I think the Kentucky Derby was this weekend. I think that things like that, same thing. You have this festival that we talk about, we love, it brings us a lot of meaning, but there's all this criticism about what it means for the animals, and the answer to that is going to be welfare. So it's things like we have better regulations in place to prevent the worst behaviors, and we have veterinarians on staff, and we have all these other things. And so I think that as on a general matter, it was the biggest difference I saw from when my grandmother was attending in the 80s and 90s and versus when I attended in the 2020s, all of these events.
I talk about my idol in this industry, Bishop. Do you know who that is?
The father of the animal welfare?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I,
in
I
the
don't know
United
his name.
States, it's okay. It's okay. Um, Henry Berg, right? So Henry
Right.
Berg, who started the ASPCA in the 1800s, obviously it wasn't like he just created it in a vacuum. There were a lot of people that were in his camp or on his team. But when reading his books, or well, he didn't write the books, but books about him, I learned a lot about how this country was it was truly built on the backs of horses and how dependent we were on those animals. And as you fast forward to what year is this, 2025, and it's really cool. So on your website, Elizabeth MeLampy, I have to do it that way, I'm sorry, .com, elizabethmelampy.com. Check it out. Check out the website. You have a learn button and you can actually see how dependent you are on animals. I think I guess this question is more of like a question statement question. I don't know how to frame it, Elizabeth, so please bear with me. From the dawn of time, like man has relied on animals. There's a great song by Bob Dylan, and I don't even know the name. I think it's Animal to Man. I'll look it up while we're doing this. Anyway, but do you ever see that where humans aren't dependent on animals and maybe more so just coexist? I think that's the world a lot of people look for is how do we coexist versus be dependent and them just part of the just the natural ecosystem without us using their fur, skin, meat, etc.
It's a great question. I think it's a really complicated one. I think a dream world would be one where we don't exploit animals. For me, my dream world. I do think that, in our modern world, it's really hard to be totally outside of the world of animal use and exploitation. I think many of us try really hard. I do. I don't eat meat. I don't eat dairy products or animal products. I don't buy leather anymore. I can try my very best. I can do everything I control. But the truth is, like, someone said to me recently that that veganism isn't the answer. Like veganism isn't the end state. It's not enough. Like there's so much else that is sort of built into the fabric of our lives and of the ways that we have to interact with the world today, that it's not sort of there is no such thing as perfection of how to get out of this system. I think it's a collective action problem because with the systems that we have, we have to rely on animals. Things like even not eating animals or animal products, you're still going to be involved in killing animals in your food, whether it's animals in the soil or animals in sort of more indirect ways. The transporting of the food releases the greenhouse gases that kill the animals in the rainforest in the Arctic. Like it's all built in. We're all complicit. Like just living on this planet is a very ethically fraught problem, and there's all sorts of ways to interact with that problem. And I think there's better ways and worse ways, but there's no perfect way. Like we are all in this mess together, us and the animals. I just think it's very we're coexisting whether we want to or not. And I think that's something that I try to wrestle with in the book, is that the problems and the solutions are going to be for they're all intertwined. And I think it's both a real risk, I think, because our world is so intertwined. If we continue to eat the way we do, pollute the way we do, consume the way we do, we're going to really lose a lot of animals and hurt a lot of animals. But on the other hand, if we stop, we have a real power within our interconnected world to save a lot of animals, to help a lot of animals. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I think that, I want to go, I guess, I maybe implicit in your question was a separate question of sort of, is it even possible to do this given our sort of innate ancient primordial relationship with animals? Like this is something that we all have in us just as human beings. As human animals, we are animals and we have this in us of sort of needing to relate to the world around us through the animals that we share the planet with. And I think that is a really interesting question that I've thought about a lot. I think that, when I think about my attempts to make the world better for animals, I think about sort of like separating that, like the perfect world situation. Like, again, if we were all cave people, how we would relate to animals is going to be really different than we are now because we live in a political reality where, where we have factory farming and 99% of our animals that we eat in America come through factory farms. We have, it's different now. Like we could wish it was like it was back then, but to be a cave person spearing a deer that you come across is really different than to be a modern human stopping through a McDonald's drive-through and grabbing a Big Mac. Like those are different things, even though I think people often talk about them as if they're the same, because it's the same instinct. It's the same sort of like you're eating an animal, but eating an animal can look like a million different things, and animal welfare can look like a million different things. And so I think it's really, it's a question that I think has no perfect answer, but does involve sort of like self-reflecting and thinking about what parts of how we use and treat animals today are you okay with and what parts are you not. And if you're not, I think it's about figuring out how you can live in accordance with those principles. So, again, that can look like a lot of different things, but I don't think there's a perfect answer.
I agree. And, I'm Hispanic. I'm from deep South Texas on the border with Mexico. So I feel like what's lost in translation a lot of times, or what you get from the cultural response, is that we've just lost the respect for what we eat. It's hard to say that, like you said, in a perfect world, there's just we we are now what we are because of things that happened in the past. So it's hard, especially in the Hispanic culture, we're very tied to our roots. We're very tied to the things that we do, whether they're good or bad. I think it's hard for a lot of, at least in the cultural side of things, for people to move on and not realize that we've just lost the respect for how we do things.
Man,
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, oh,
yeah.
sorry.
No, you're good. I've been mulling over how I want to say this. And first off, the people that listen to the show know, I've been an advocate of someone who eats only plants up until recently. I didn't have to. I took a decision to incorporate fish into my diet again. And we can talk about that offline if you want or whatever. But it's not like I eat fish sandwiches every day from McDonald's or anything like that. But anyway, but I've been, I don't, would you say, Bishop, I'm an advocate for like plant-based diet, or just more so like that's just what I eat for the most part?
I don't think that you would be an advocate per se. It's just like the lifestyle that you choose, and I mean, you don't push it on anybody. I feel like
Exactly.
sometimes advocates, I mean, there's a spectrum of advocates like there is with
Yeah.
everything, but yeah,
Yeah.
you don't push it on anybody. Like we know your lifestyle, but you don't like try to beat it down my throat.
And I don't know if I'll continue to eat fish long term or if this is just something I'm doing because this stupid fracture in my leg and people convince me that that'll help it heal faster. Anyway, so where I'm going with this, Elizabeth and Ashley, is if we think about evolution and independency, I'm gonna try not to get too like sci-fi here, but I want to put this in perspective, and I think that's the only way to do it. Especially like if we look at what I can relate to the Native American culture here in this country. Everything is very animal centric, whether it was how they, uh, you've heard the term spirit animal, how they dress, how, medicine, etc. And plants and animals for that aspect. And as we continue, I think evolution is real. Like I think people can evolve and continue to like take steps into the next phase of whatever consciousness we're in. And so just bear with me. I hope I don't lose people here. And I may. We're there, like mathematically, scientifically, we're not alone in the universe, right? Like there is just, I say this from time to time, there are more stars in space than grains of sand on this planet. And so if next time you go to the beach and try to just comprehend what that looks like, I want you to pick up a handful of sand and think you're holding probably over like 100 billion grains of sand in one handful. And now you have a whole beach full, an ocean full, and there's more stars out there. So as we talk about like life in whatever it may be, like at some point, I think our I don't even know if we can call them humans, aliens, whatever. Like we've evolved to the point where we don't need nutrition through animal or even probably plants. Like they found ways to be fulfilled through matter. And I know it sounds crazy. I just want you to use your like imaginary brains here, people. But my point and the reason I'm bringing it up is like maybe we're at level one in consciousness right now. Like we're just like level one, level two, wherever that may be. And maybe there's an infinite amount of levels. But in this level, we're learning how to process on into the next level, which wouldn't be codependency on eating or needing animals or even plants. Like maybe there's other substances out there. Not that I'm going to go around and chew rocks, but I think you get what I'm saying.
I do get what you're saying. And I think that that is part of my personal journey towards stopping eating animals was I would have framed it a little differently, but I think it's that same instinct of like, of we have reached a point in human history where we now have choices. And while like we might kind of biologically have been designed to eat meat, like I understand all of those arguments, while we might instinctively feel like that's our birthright, I know there's a lot of religious arguments out there about dominion. I mean, there's lots of good arguments for how we got here. But for me, I sort of looked around, I saw and learned so much about like all of the bad that happens. And I just thought, it's not maybe a rock, to your point, it's not matter, but you have a choice of how to interact with all of that. And I think you can choose, there can be, those choices can look like an infinite spectrum of choices, all the way from, not caring at all and eating factory farm meat 3 times a day to being vegan and many things in between and on either end. But, I think for me, it felt like it wasn't necessary anymore. Like we have plenty of plants out there, plenty of vegan nutrition and whatever, that it made it feel like when I reframed it from this is natural, this is how we eat, this is how I was raised to eat, to this is a choice. It sort of made the choice obvious for me because it sort of took it out of that realm of we've been doing this since time immemorial, that this cavemen did it, we can do it. It took it out of that realm and of the history realm and put it into sort of a different plane of decision making, which I think is related to your thought of sort of like this, how we relate to animals on this planet currently is not necessarily inevitable. And it doesn't even have to be on a different planet or in a different galaxy. I think it's not inevitable now for how we live today. I think we live in a world with lots of choices and lots of, I think, opportunities to influence the people around us to learn more about their their relationship with animals and to live in peace with it. I think that one of the more complicated things that all three of us, I think, have touched on is about the sort of like cultural importance of these things. Like humans, I don't think we'll ever just eat like protein smoothies and rocks because we love food. Like food is important to us, whether it's, no matter what your culture is. Like, I mean, I grew up eating certain things that my grandmother had passed down for generations that had, lots of animals and animal products in it. And now I don't. And that's a loss. Like that is a loss for me and a loss for for how I relate to my family in the world. And I think it's true in cultures all over the place. And it was certainly true in the festivals that I researched for this book. I think all of the festivals that I went to were really deeply rooted in local culture and local identity and local tradition. And I think it's a really hard thing for me, an outsider in all of these communities, to come in and say, hey, wait a second, why are you doing this? And I think, it's a hard thing. It's something I wrestled with a lot in the text of the book. I was really honest with the readers about how I was feeling when I saw these things and sort of the difficulties sort of morally and ethically I had with having my value system and my ethics coming into conflict so much with what people I think would talk about as a matter of local pride. And I think that piece of belonging, we use animals to help figure out who we are in all sorts of ways, whether it's what we eat, whether it's what we do on a Saturday afternoon. I just think it's part of how we interact and part of how we build our own identity. So it's a really fraught kind of conversation and question, but I don't think that means we shouldn't be having it. I think, part of how my book wraps up is to say basically, yes, all of that cultural tradition and history is there, but again, it's not inevitable. These are choices we make every single year, every single time we do this. We could choose to do something else, and I think that again, framing it, taking it out of the history and framing it like a choice, I think is part of what I tried to do in this book. And yeah, I got little off topic from the aliens eating rocks, but that's, well, I guess, how I'm thinking about it.
You're the one with the Harvard, Harvard degree. I'm over here talking about, crazy sci-fi.
Eating rocks.
But hey, it works. All right. I want to take this I want to kind of transition now into the world of, our world of the animal welfare in the animal shelter and animal control world, and kind of just gauge your knowledge of what do you know about our industry and then we'll kind of get into like some of the relatability from the book and how animals are treated, and when we talk about culture, community culture, and what's expected from a shelter, etc.
Yeah, I don't know a lot. I don't know a lot of the nitty-gritty. I think that from, everything that I've continued to sort of think about and assess about animals, I think that the industries that interact with animals look like so many different things. And I think that the people who are involved in a lot of these things, I think they are different from the companies, and I think people are trained by certain people and not other people. Like there is no monolith of the animal care industry or the animal welfare best practice. Like those things can look like so many other things. So I don't have a lot of expertise in it, but I will say that I have a lot of respect for it. I think it's really hard to make hard choices about animals, and I think that you have to constantly sort of be assessing what's best for the animal, what's best for the communities, what's best for the people involved, and I think that those are really hard choices.
It's
Sums it up
yeah.
just, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Some days, I've been doing this going on 16, 17 years now.
She started when she was 12.
Wow.
Wow.
Don't hate because I'm younger than you, sir. Okay. It's not my fault. Okay. I have more gray hair than you at this point.
Mm, mm.
Um, you made me lose my train of thought.
Sorry, you
How
were
dare
talking about you
you?
started 17 years ago.
Yeah, and sometimes I struggle, with the industry in a sense, like I'm walking through the facility I work at and I'm like, this is just sad. Like it is absolutely sad that we have come to a point where this is necessary, where we were housing, multiple animals at a time. They aren't able to do what they would normally do as a domesticated animal. And I struggle. It's a huge struggle. And I don't know if Dan, if you struggle with that sometimes when you walk through a facility, but I do sometimes. And I'm just like, how do I do this every day? Like, how do I come to work and how do I continue to do the good work that I know we do and just kind of get past the like, why is it that we have to do this?
You bring up a great point, and I never expected this to be the case. And I don't know if you can hear Mooney. He's like,
I
there's
did.
somebody out there with a skateboard. I don't
Get
know.
them.
Mooney, it's 8 a.m. So one of the biggest things that uh, has affected me over the last few years is like having to, I'm not the boot on the ground anymore. So I'm not out there investigating the cases. But when I have to review the cases and look at the videos or photos, it's not as easy as it once was. And that's a big change, a big challenge into uh, just understanding that like it can take a toll on you.
Of course. Yeah, I think that is so understandable. And I think it's often like a piece of animal advocacy or animal welfare care that is kind of forgotten about. I think like we try to divorce the work from the feelings about the work. And I think that and on the one hand is natural. I think it's like it comes from, I think, a long lineage of like being professional, and like what that means you kind of have to be objective and think with your brain and not your heart and make, all of those decisions from a place of rationality. But I think the truth is when you're in this, when you're in these animal adjacent fields, you do interact with so much sadness and so much heartbreak. And you're making impossible choices and you're sort of being asked to prioritize an impossible set of things. And, that wears on you. It wears on your psyche. And I think it's true, I'm sure, in your work, but it's true in my own work. And as I work on writing projects and I'm hours deep into horrible reports of horrible things, you just sort of look at yourself and you're like, what am I doing? This is so hard. But it like has to, like, I think it has to get done. And I think it's so important to continue to kind of keep both those halves of yourself, like both your rational brain, but also like your sort of spiritual, emotional, personal health and sort of mindset taken care of. Because I think we have such a schism in animal care world between like the spirit of the work and the work itself. And I think it's a hard thing to sort of get back personally, but I think it's so important.
I agree. And once you lose either of those, it's time to get out, and it's a good spot to be in when you can realize that. Sometimes I've seen people who don't realize that, and they get pretty cold and they lose sense of kind of what they're doing and why they're doing it. But yeah, as I get further along in my career, it just sometimes some days just get a lot harder than others to separate that. And I mean, we're only human.
We're only
And
human.
I look at it too with this dichotomy of our animal shelter animals and that whole industry. And as you mentioned, Elizabeth, we don't have a governing body. So with some of the events and things that you went to, there may be, and I don't know, you can actually probably add better context, but whether it's USDA, APHIS, the Animal Welfare Act, etc., like there in the shelter world, in the animal control world, there may be some state like regulations or state oversight in some of it, but there isn't like a large governing body that says, here's the standards, here's how we basically, no pun intended, breed consistency in an area that we don't have. And so I would love to see a world. I mean, this, if you look back to 1860 or 74, anyway, in the late 1800s, um, I mean, we're only what, two, three generations deep into having like animal welfare enforcement, animal shelters, etc. And so there's still a lot of room for improvement. And I just wonder, like, where we need, so like when, okay, when Henry Berg started the ASPCA, like he teamed up with a prominent New York lawyer named Elbridge Gerry, not the Elbridge Gerry that was, I think, vice president or president. I don't know. Different Gary or Jerry. I don't know how you would say it, something. Um, but like it takes a village, as the saying goes, to like create change. And I think the biggest thing is how do we start to not separate? So my point of that being is the person that, is on, so and I know Bishop, you deal with this in your community, and pretty much every animal shelter welfare community deals with this. You have people that, sit on social media and will advocate for a dog that bit a child in the face to not be euthanized, but they're sitting there eating their chicken sandwich. And it's like, how do we, like, where do we draw the line? Like, what are we doing here? And so, animals are animals, and how do we get people to see that just because I have a dog that barks at skateboarders and loves them, he really does. He just wants them to be safe. He knows that they could fall off and get hurt. Um, but how do we like maybe not draw the line between and draw like the circle around both?
I mean, if I had the answer to that question, I would have written my book all about that. I think that it's really hard. I think that, to your point, I think there's so many different things going on here. And to your point about, um, so I guess one point I want to say is that I write about a little bit in the book about the concept of speciesism. And like this is a concept that goes back, decades, but it's certainly not my idea. But the idea that we treat different animals differently, I think is the core of the idea without a rational sort of science-based or sort of actual like without a basis rooted in reality. So why we treat chickens so differently than dogs, for example, or pigs differently than dogs, pigs who are smarter than dogs in many cases, and pigs who have, a kind of an unbelievable amount of intelligence and ability to suffer because of that intelligence. We treat unbelievably horribly than, more horribly than we treat dogs in general in society. And there's no real rational reason for that other than that most Americans like to eat pigs and most Americans don't like to eat dogs. That's the reason. But, there's not a lot of again, like sort of scientific basis behind that. There's no sort of rational reason. And so, I think this looks a lot like prejudice. This looks a lot like assuming things about species that aren't sort of grounded in reality. And then it has real impacts for these animals' lives. So I think, having people care unbelievable amounts about their dogs and cats or about, a sort of random dog at a shelter they see online and sort of flood the comment sections about, that's really easy. That doesn't ask them to change anything about their lives or think hard about the decisions they've made their whole life. But if you ask them to stop eating pork, then they think, oh, I had bacon for breakfast. I'm not a bad person.
Mm.
There's nothing going, they sort of shut down because I think no one wants to think, I didn't want to think when I stopped eating meat that I was a bad person. And, the truth is we're not bad people. I wasn't a bad person because I ate meat growing up. I was just someone who, was brought up in the world that I was brought up in and had made choices pretty unthinkingly. And honestly, was told a lot of lies by, the government and by companies about what it was needed for my health, A, and then B, sort of what was going on behind closed doors at farms and slaughterhouses. And once I unlearned both of those things, all of those sort of what methods of thinking went away. And so I guess that leads me to the second piece. So speciesism, kind of the first thing I wanted to talk about in response to your question. And then the second thing is, I think the amount of willful and unknowing ignorance that we as sort of consumers and as Americans have about how animals are treated in society comes from both, I think, like industry and government and from our own brains. So one of the things that I guess I struggled with when I was learning about all of these things was realizing that labels actually don't mean a lot. They don't mean what you think they mean. There's a lot of consumer confusion about things like humanely raised on a family farm. I walked down the meat aisle the other day and I saw on like a big brand name chicken breast said that it was humanely raised on a family farm. And like I know now that that's probably bullshit. And I think I wouldn't have known 6, 7, 8 years ago. I would have thought, oh, great. Like I care about animal welfare. I only want to eat the best chicken. I will pay the extra $2 for that chicken breast. And I would have bought that chicken breast and made it for dinner. And the truth is, there's a 99% chance that that chicken breast, suffered immensely in its life on a factory farm without sort of these promises being upheld that I, as a consumer, felt really good about myself because I paid the extra $2 and I got this, nice, organic, humanely raised chicken breast. And so I think some of it too is finding a way to speak honestly to consumers and to Americans about what happens to animals. And I think it's really hard because we have Americans, humans everywhere probably have so many preconceived ideas about animals and tend to get defensive when you start bringing up, animals or veganism or even just like reducing meat consumption. People, they're on their back foot already. They don't want to hear it. They want to come at you with justifications and excuses and sort of their own thinking and whatever. And I think that's part of why in my book, it's one of the things that excited me about writing about animal festivals. And I purposely didn't pick some big ones. I didn't go to a rodeo. I didn't go to the Kentucky Derby. Some really big ones I didn't go to because I didn't want people on the defensive when they opened the first page of my book. I wanted this to be almost like a thought experiment of sort of like, this is happening to animals around the country. What do you think about it? And I think when it's not so ingrained in your own personal history or in what you had for breakfast before you cracked open the cover of this book, it's a lot easier to have those thought experiments. And so one of the, I'll give like a quick anecdote from the book. One of the things that, so I structure the book in 3 parts to sort of relate or sort of mirror how we relate to animals, I think, in broad categories. So the first is dominance, the second is humor, and the third is reverence. So it's sort of like depending on the animal, dogs we have a really reverential relationship with, but I think pigs and chickens we don't. And so the dominance section starts off with the rattlesnake roundup, which takes place in Sweetwater, Texas, and they basically hunt snakes from the wild, they bring them in alive, and then they behead them in public and sort of skin them and deep fry their flesh, and it's a very grisly event. Attendees and workers make handprints with the rattlesnake blood. It's like very kind of visceral. And everyone I tell has that exact reaction. Oh my God, how horrible. This is sort of, we instinctively think that is a bad thing to do. Most people, not the people in Sweetwater mostly, but, and the second chapter I have in the dominant section is the Maine Lobster Festival, which is, by all accounts, a very different event. It's on, it takes place on the coast of Maine in beautiful summer days. It's sort of this really family-friendly event where people just gather to share a lobster meal and enjoy the coastal scenery. But I argue in the book that these 2 events are actually really similar. If you sort of take away the cultural trappings and take away our speciesism, at both events, they hunt animals from the wild and bring them in alive. They kill both sets of animals kind of en masse in a ritualistic way. And the Maine Lobster Festival, they dump them in the world's largest lobster cooker. It's like these 8 massive vats of water and, they get boiled alive. Both festivals really deal with the bodies afterward. You eat the flesh, you buy souvenirs of the skins or the claws or whatever. You sort of like crack through things and skin things with your own hands. And then both events really kind of have that idea of like outsider versus insider, like political rallying cry aspect of it. So in Sweetwater, it's very much like, this is how we do it here. And, it's the same kind of energy and atmosphere in Maine. And so I think a lot of people, you tell people you went to the Maine Lobster Festival, and a lot of the first reaction you often get is like, oh, wow, that must have been so nice. And you tell people you went to the rattlesnake roundup and people are like, oh, that's so horrible. And I think that those 2 responses sort of speak to this question of why people can be so riled up about a dog being euthanized, but eat, a factory farm chicken in some cases multiple times a day or whatever. And I think we have this kind of unbelievable lack of rationality when it comes to animals. We don't equate like with like. We don't sort of look at facts across species in a sort of rational way. We operate based on assumptions and cultural knowledge and sort of how it's always been done. And I think it's a hard problem to solve.
And I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I laugh because I mean, a lot of what you're saying is happening in our industry right now, where it's like people have taken on this stance that they think they know what it's about, but in reality, that's not what's happening. And we're in a worse spot than we were before this whole storm came and took over. So sorry, that's why I was laughing, because it's just like everything can just kind of coincide with, what people think and what the reality is going on behind closed doors.
Totally.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating.
I I think the more that we can have conversations like this, and the more that we can network and create opportunities to just grow. We're not asking anybody to change their lifestyle today. It's not like listen to this show and you know don't ever go to a zoo again, or don't ever go see a whale in captivity or swim with dolphins when you're out of the country, whatever it may be. And so all we're saying is like perspective, and look at it and continue to maybe even ask yourself those whys. And I think that's what's important is, the why behind things that we do. And look, I've, I will always be an advocate for trying my best to, as we say on the show, help people, help animals, because at the end of the day, with all of it, the issues that we're talking about, it's not an animal problem, whether it's at these, um, you
Never
know,
has been.
no, it's a people problem. And so that's the reason why we do this show, is to help educate and bring to light some of these things that maybe it's not normally thought about. And so that's why we do that here. Elizabeth, where can people get your book?
People can get the book anywhere books are sold. You can order it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, sort of anywhere. And if you just Google Forget the Camel, it should pop right up.
And what's your like? What other projects are you working on? What's next for Elizabeth?
Continuing to work on some writing projects about, humans and animals. I think these topics of how we relate is so important. And I do think, to your point about it's not maybe advocating for a specific practice or whatever. I think what I always say, what I advocate for is thinking about your relationship to animals, like thinking about making sure you're doing things that are thoughtful, that are purposeful, that align with your values. Because I think so often we just do things unthinkingly because that's how they've always been done. And I think that's how you run into these traps where, you think one thing is happening, but it's actually totally different. And I think, living in more alignment between what you want to happen and what is happening, I think involves asking questions. It involves doing your own research. And I think if you don't get satisfactory answers, that is an answer. I think like if the information is so hard to find about animal welfare or about how an animal is being treated behind closed doors, that I think should be taken as an answer. And so I think doing that sort of thought exercise is always what I advocate for, and just sort of trying to be purposeful about how you relate to animals. And I think it's such a process. It's a process that is never done. It is not done for me. I do it every day, and I think it's so important.
Absolutely.
Agreed. It's a good perspective to have. It really is.
Absolutely. Bishop, you got anything else before we wrap it up?
No, I think this is a great conversation. Again, there's a lot of moving parts, and
Mhm.
again, I can, me being Hispanic, again, a lot of it I see in the way my culture treats animals is just say it goes back to our culture. Like that's just how we do things. And there's always opportunity to learn and move on and grow. And some cultures are more stubborn than others. So I can definitely see that. I've lived it. It's just human beings are just so complicated.
So complicated. And all of those things are goods too. It's so hard to balance these different costs and benefits because it brings a true benefit to us as humans in some of these instances. And how do you balance that with the cost to an animal? It's like an impossible question to answer. It's a hard one. So it's like, yeah, I like really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show and talk about this. Honestly, it's an amazing topic, something that I think we need to have more conversations on it, and I hope people are just open to listening. Again, it's not asking people to like go and pick up a bunch of Impossible burgers and have a barbecue today, but just thinking about that in the aspects of like, can I do anything different? Does one day, if I, you know, just not have animal products for one day, what impact does that have? You know, if 8 billion people in this country, well, that'd be a big country, world did that one day every week, what impact would that have, right?
Mhm.
So we really do appreciate that, and you know, you're always welcome back on the show if there's ever anything you'd like to chat about, or if there's new material coming out, or just new topics. Um, Please reach out. I'm sure our guests would be interested in hearing what you're up to.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I would love to be back.
Transparency and conversation, people. That's all. It's so simple. It's
Just
so
listen.
simple.
Just listen, people. Right? Instead of
Absolutely.
people, I mean, I've learned a lot. People don't want to listen, but I think there are some. I mean, if you're tuning in, honestly, and we appreciate people that do listen. If you are tuning in, you're tuning in to listen. So that does not fall. What's the word I want? There's a saying that I like to use. That is not lost on us. We do appreciate those people listening and open to having those conversations. So, Bishop, let's take it away.
Oh,
Help,
people.
help animals.
Keep it
That's the best part.
moving.